Hello everyone, I'm TFC328 here, and it's not about you do differently, it's about you do well. I love Mega Man X. I've already made a countdown about the series' armor upgrades and a review on my favorite game in the series, but there is one thing about these games that always interested me, comparing the SNES classic Mega Man X to its PSP remake Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. I think that both of these games are great in their own right, but it's only fair to compare the remake to its retro counterpart. This is not a which one is better video. I just wanted to compare the two, and while I'll chime in with my own 2 cents here and there, I'll leave the winner of the comparison up to you. So let's not waste any time and start comparing these two great games. 1. Story, character, and pacing. The story is basically the same across both games. Sigma is revolting against society in some way, and X and Zero are dispatched to stop him and his army of Mavericks. On the SNES, they did manage to create proper development of our 2 main heroes, but the villains, even if they were given dialogue, were very one-dimensional, destroy-everything type villains with very little defining personality. The PSP, being a much more powerful system, is able to expand the game's story into something a little more complex, particularly with the villains. Sigma's revolution is spurred because of X's limitless potential, and he intends to incur the evolution of Reploids because of it, even if it means eradicating humanity in the process. In his own words,
evolution requires sacrifice.
He and Ultron have a lot more in common than I thought. Vile is given some more personality by giving him an innate hatred of X and his goody-good nature, painting him as a proper rival as opposed to Sigma's lapdog as he was in the SNES original. The bosses are also given more personality by virtue of having fully voiced conversations before their boss fight, providing insight as to why they either chose to or were forced to join Sigma's rebellion. X and Zero feel more like friends in the PSP remake than they do in the SNES original, where I got a mentor and student vibe from them. Personally, I prefer them as friends, especially seeing as how that's more consistent with the rest of the series. Not that they can't be friends with that teacher-student dynamic, but I just like the "you teach me and I'll teach you" approach. As a result of the general Mega Man format of 8 bosses and a fortress, both games are paced very similarly. The difference is in the intro stage and the fortress levels, the latter of which are entirely redesigned in the PSP remake compared to the SNES original. In the SNES version of the intro stage, Vile was a forced loss battle, and the following dialogue gave you the impression that you would only grow stronger from there, giving you the motivation to keep playing onwards. In the PSP remake, you can defeat him, and the dialogue is less about X getting stronger and more about X and Zero's friendship. I feel that the player's motivation, as well as the sense of menace Vile had as a result of this, is lost in translation here. The boss levels are essentially the same, but in the fortress levels, you fight Vile and witness Zero's sacrifice before rematching 1 boss in Stage 1, 3 bosses in Stage 2, and a whopping 5 bosses in Stage 3 of the SNES original. In the PSP remake, you refight 2 bosses on Stage 1, 3 on Stage 2, and 3 on Stage 3 before fighting Vile and witnessing Zero's sacrifice. The boss rematches are much better paced than the PSP remake, but I feel that you lose something by putting the Vile battle at the end of the last major stage of the game. Sure, the forced loss battle in the SNES game's Vile rematch does heavily detract from the getting stronger angle of the intro stage's ending dialogue in just about every way, which is something the PSP version gets rid of, admittedly. But Zero's sacrifice at the start of Sigma 1 gave you real motivation to fight on through the rest of Sigma's castle. Near the end of Stage 3, you're almost done anyways, and the emotional weight of the scene isn't nearly as strong. While the PSP remake has stronger characterizations and better paced boss rematches in the Sigma stages, the SNES version handles smaller emotional scenes and player motivation much better. 2. Graphics and art direction. The art direction is solid for both games, having a very anime-influenced style like the classic series. Which one is better graphically will have to depend on your tastes in video game visuals. It's generally accepted that 2D visuals will hold up compared to 3D ones. Don't believe me? Just look at early PS1 FMVs. Good lord. Heck, some of my reviews are showing even late 90s and early 2000s CG doesn't age gracefully either.
I need a monster to claw with that there cut!
Back on topic, the original Mega Man X looks great for a Super Nintendo game and still holds up graphically to this day. The sprite work is solid, it's easy to tell who's who and what's what, and the animation is top-notch. Many people like to cite this game for its little details, and it's hard to disagree. One of my personal favorites is with Storm Eagle's boss room. Not only is it the same airship from the intro stage, but when Storm Eagle falls, the clouds in the background start flying upwards at a much faster rate, foreshadowing its reappearance in Spark Mandrill's stage. While the PSP remake has good graphics to the system and the animations are also top-notch, the polygonal look of the models might be a turn-off, some details look distractingly flatter than they should be, and some things don't pop in the same way they did on the SNES. It also loses a few of the original's little touches. With the Storm Eagle example, the airship is still the same one from the intro, but you never see the bottom of it since you start the fight by running on top of it instead of running through the bottom and destroying it, and the clouds don't move differently than they did at the start. not really indicating its presence in Spark Mandrill stage unless you knew beforehand. Little things like that do add to the experience, like I said in my X5 review, and it's one of the many reasons why people love revisiting the SNES original. The remake has some good graphical fidelity, but doesn't have some of the SNES original subtle nuances, and it'll likely look dated in short order, while the SNES original still looks great today. 3. Music and sound direction. If there's one thing many people agree on about Mega Man X on Super Nintendo, it's that its soundtrack kicks ass. Just from the title screen music alone, you know you're in for a good time. Some of my favorites are the intro stage, all the boss themes, Sting Chameleon, Boomer Kuwanger, Flame Mammoth, and Sigma Palace 1. Every piece suits the setting and is memorable in its own right. So how do you compete with a classic gaming soundtrack? You don't. While the Maverick Hunter Remake's music is good in its own right, it doesn't carry that same oomph that made the original game's music so memorable. Besides, I just have a stronger liking to 16-bit era music to begin with. There's just something about the way 16-bit game music sounds and how much variety composers could get out of the limitations that really appeals to me. And while both games have good sound effects, I'm gonna have to lean more towards the SNES version for one reason. X will not stop shouting his weapons' names. For some reason, the sound editor thought it would be a great idea for X to shout pretty much the exact same line for almost every single time he fires one of the boss weapons, and it gets grating fast. One could argue that it's the player's fault for relying on them so much, but unlike, say, X5, where the default weapons are so much better due to not triggering as many invincibility frames on the bosses, X1's boss weapons are really useful. So having X constantly shout, "Storm Tornado!" gets obnoxious. The SNES original has an iconic soundtrack and good sound effects, and while the Maverick Hunter Remake has good music and good sound effects, the music doesn't compare to the SNES original. Will you shut up about your shotgun ice already?
This is what it's like.
4. Controls and gameplay. In all honesty, from my experience, I felt little difference between the two versions in terms of gameplay and control. Sure, I have a more different control experience since I have the X Collection on GameCube, but that means little in terms of gameplay itself, as the mobility, shooting, boss weapons, and most of the level designs of bosses save the Sigma stages and intro file respectively are the same across both versions. Sure, Maverick Hunter has a hard mode that changes the enemy placement to be trickier to defeat and navigate around, and in the main boss's cases, gives them a new move or two, but for the most part, the same strategies you use in the SNES game can be applied to the PSP game as well. I have a hard time coming up with any other way to compare the two, as they really are that similar to each other, down to the defeating certain bosses affects other stages mechanic. And 5. Collectibles, secrets, and extra features. As far as collectibles are concerned, both games are basically identical. There are 8 heart tanks, 4 sub-tanks, 4 capsule upgrades, a secret capsule containing the Hadouken from Street Fighter, and Zero's Buster, which is given to you if you didn't get Dr. Light's arm upgrade by Sigma 1 in Mega Man X SNES, or Sigma 3 in Maverick Hunter X. The most notable difference is in the locations of the capsules. In the SNES game, the legs were placed in the middle of Chill Penguin stage, making them unavoidable, the head was hidden near the end of Storm Eagle stage behind a bunch of tanks of flammable material, the arms were hidden in Flame Mammoth stage requiring the legs and head to get to, and the body was hidden behind a mini-boss near the start of Sting Chameleon stage. In Maverick Hunter X, the legs were hidden where the arms were in Flame Mammoth stage, so they're completely optional here. The head is found in a new corner of Chill Penguin stage behind some blocks that can be broken with the legs. The body is hidden where the head was in Storm Eagle stage, except now blocked by blocks that require the head parts to crush. And the arms are where the body was in Sting Chameleon stage, except that the mini-boss can now be defeated with one Storm Tornado here. That and Zero's Buster obtained in Sigma 3 is immensely more powerful than Light's upgrade, as it can damage bosses, including Final Sigma, much more than even their weaknesses, unlike in the SNES original where it was basically Dr. Light's upgrade. Another difference is that the Hadouken in the original Mega Man X also required you to beat the 8 main Mavericks before obtaining a Hadouken. It required you going through the final part of Arm and Armadillo stage without taking damage 5 times, and it wouldn't be saved even on the X Collection. In Maverick Hunter, you only need to get all the collectibles, boss weapons not required, and go through all of Arm and Armadillo stage without getting hit once. As an added bonus, it saves onto the save file like modern technology can allow. The Hadouken can be executed with the actual command from Street Fighter, quarter circle forward and attack, to throw a fireball that one-shots anything, including bosses, except Final Sigma, at least in the SNES original. On the PSP version, get on the mechanical paw, throw a fireball, and watch the easiest ending you ever earned. The only other alteration to the collectibles was needing the head parts for Flame Mammoth sub-tank, but otherwise they're in the same places and require the same things across both versions. Maverick Hunter does outdo the SNES original in terms of extra features, as aside from there being a hard mode, beating the game once unlocks both an OVA detailing the new backstory titled Day of Sigma, and the ability to play the game as Vile, who not only gets a completely different playstyle of having multiple completely different weapons for many different situations, initially restricted by a cost but that goes away once the game is cleared, but also completely relocated heart tanks and sub-tanks, new cutscenes and conversations, an uber-powerful ride armor right out of X's intro stage fight with him, and a new final boss that's quite a fun challenge. Honestly, I'm very glad they did this instead of making the extra character Zero again. At this point in the series, it'd be redundant, gameplay and story-wise, since Zero doesn't have his saber, so he'd be less different from X since he not only has nothing but the typical buster, but he'd also get much the same weapon since no saber means no fancy techniques. While they're mostly the same in terms of collectibles, comparing extra features is quite unfair since the SNES could only handle so much, and the PSP is a much more powerful system that can hold so much more. As a result, the team can implement more of their ideas in 2005 than they could in 1993. Wow, this remake's been out for over 10 years by this point? God, I feel old! Overall, the original is one of the best games of the 16-bit era that can still be appreciated by fans both young and old. And the remake has many additional features and objective upgrades that fans old and new will come to enjoy. Your mileage may vary on whether some of these changes and additions were worth anything in the long run, but I personally prefer the remake for its added features. Not to say that I hate the original, that couldn't be further from the truth. But this is a comparison video, so it's only fair to share my thoughts on the subject. I'm Transformers Fanco328 and...
On a charge shot!
Really, Vile? You're worried about something that did 3, maybe 4 points of damage to you at most? You had plenty more health to survive that hit after the fight, so what gives?